think Tully Blanchard would have made a good NWA World Heavyweight Champion. I realized Flair had a stranglehold on it, and it was in the process of passing it on, excuse me, this is worded poorly, and he was in the process of passing it on to Sting, maybe because years earlier Magnum TA was the original heir apparent. Tully had great wrestling skill, work, and was incredible on the mic, had tons of heat. When paired with Baby Doll or JJ, he was just that much hotter. I think he would have been an intriguing champion, but I'll defer to you.
Well, and so instead of Tully should win from Flair instead of Sting or whatever the fuck, is that what we're saying here?
I think he just confused the issue by throwing that in. I guess just the idea of Tully as NWA champion during that era.
Oh, okay. Well, and first of all, yes, obviously they were trying to build another babyface because you were following about a 2-year period where the biggest box office babyface attraction in the business that the NWA has available to them, Dusty Rhodes, and the biggest heel attraction that they have available to them, Ric Flair, have had a huge program. So they had been wanting, and Dusty was planning for a next babyface after him to then relieve Flair and then hopefully have another heel following that, et cetera, et cetera. The dance of love in the wrestling business. I watched that Seinfeld the other night. So, and so that he had started with Magnum TA, and then obviously it wasn't going to be Magnum. Then Barry, but then for various reasons it wasn't going to be Barry, and Sting was getting hot, so it needed to be Sting. At that point, then they would have started grooming another heel that hopefully Sting would get over, and then, or, obviously nobody was trying to retire Flair either until fucking Herd got there. But you know what I'm saying, just to be fresh to people's mind. Tully would have been a good NWA world champion in the 60s or the 70s, but not in the 80s. Because if you look, after Flair set that precedent, the 80s were all about flash and excess, right? Tully would be a good NWA world champion today. Tully just wouldn't have, for the 80s and then for the 90s when everything just went fucking crazy, Tully was too real of a person. Tully was an entitled, rich, arrogant, obnoxious prick with good athletic ability, but an overachiever who fucking worked his ass off and got legitimate heat and could fucking work with anybody and fucking like to show off his goddamn egotism and his arrogance. That was Tully Blanchard, the character, and that was also Tully fucking Blanchard, right? If he'd have tried to be flashier, and I didn't even really buy him when he was younger in San Antonio with the fucking, the younger look that he had. He just always, to me, with the 80s NWA Crockett, he was a cantankerous fucker with every attribute or detriment that I just described. And he was perfect in that spot with them. And you could tell that it was real life, as we've talked about, the whole Horseman setup. They were out every night doing everything they said they were doing on television. But he wasn't the guy. He wasn't the guy to be the champion. Because he was such a solid worker and a real guy and a real character, it would have worked, I think, in the 60s and 70s in the NWA, because you needed a guy that could come from town to town and face the local hero and be vulnerable, but still carry it like a pro. And that's the kind of thing that the fucking audience, some of the audience likes today, which is what Aldous is doing with the NWA title and et cetera, et cetera. So Tully would probably work better as a world champion today than he would have in the fucking late 80s or 90s.
But if you had taken, let's say, 1985 Tully Blanchard, 1986 Tully Blanchard, and dropped him into 1976, imagine him as a touring NWA champion. I know he doesn't have the height, but his ability to make people really want to see him get his ass kicked probably would have been super effective in that role of going into Memphis, going into Florida, going into different towns, and you can't wait to see the local guy kick the crap out of him.
And he's in every bad B movie of he's the college fucking football jock, that condescending sneer with the suit and carrying the belt. He's Flair, but without the blonde hair and the fucking fact that he's fucking Flair, right? And he looks like a champion and a professional, but also he can work well enough that you can think he can be dangerous, but then he can still get his fucking ass kicked believably because he's not that big.
Our next question here, Jim, is sent in from...
Do you know how much money we could make if we could find somebody with a time machine and just implement all these various ideas? We could control wrestling throughout the history.
Someone get on that. Someone out there. If Elon Musk is listening, help.
Well, there's a lot of the Cult of Cornette members that are smart with all of this technology and everything. Somebody whip us up a time machine and bring it to us, and I'll sell it for you and give you back 40% of it.